thanks so much for
Yeah.
inviting us to interview you.
Mhm.
So after 2 years as mayor now, what do you see as your administration's biggest successes so far?
Well, I think first and foremost is the port. We realigned that project, reassigned the construction management to a different group, to Jacobs Engineering, and they've done phenomenally well. We're back on the timeline. We're actually ahead, and I think that because that strikes to the biggest issue facing the state is food security, in the sense that 90 to 95% of all citizens in the state are fed from that port, not to mention everything else from car parts to building materials come over that port. So, because right now, today, we don't have food security, because that port, as you know, is in a great deal of jeopardy in an earthquake. That last earthquake, I've given this number many times, but I'd like your listeners to understand that that last earthquake, had it gone 7 or 8 more seconds, it would have failed, and if it failed, all other conversations in the state stop at that point, because we estimate not less than half the population of the state would have to leave the state until it's fixed. And that's not hyperbole, because if there's no food, there's nothing else going on, because there's no people, because there's no food. People's eyes glaze over when I tell them that, but our job is to think clearly on this matter, and food security needs to drive everything. But we're getting there. We're encouraged. We got $200 million. The legislature last year saw the importance of us, gave us $200 million, the largest single appropriation in the history of the state. This last year, our Senate delegation got us $70 million in appropriations for a port, and that's, of all the ports in the entire country, that's the single largest. We beat out Los Angeles, the Northeast ports. We did very well, thanks to Senator Murkowski and Senator Sullivan. So so the port is probably the biggest accomplishment, getting that tasking back on track.
And can I just ask a follow-up? I mean, given that it's coming up before the assembly, are you still supportive of the expanded design concept for the port? I mean, kind of uniformity across both?
Uniformity, expanded concept, I haven't heard of that one before, but yes, we're uniform dock front. That's critical. We're definitely in support of uniform surcharge going forward for the next several decades. We think that creates the best competitive environment. Yeah, completely. That's the port right there under the glass. We focus on this every day. It's a big thing to us.
So, next question. What do you see as your administration's biggest mistakes so far, and what, if anything, would you change or do differently if you had the chance, knowing what you know now, 2 years in?
Well, I and us, we were new to politics, so I think in the beginning I wouldn't have been as contentious with the assembly. That doesn't mean I should have done anything differently, but the hyperbole ramped up on both sides. Coming out of COVID, it just kind of carried on. We saw the assembly, you were there, we saw the assembly races, or not races, the assembly meetings during COVID, and it was very contentious. And that seemed to have a gravity, and it just continued on. I should have done more to tamp that down. So, but I think now, especially since Chris Constant has taken over as chair, I think our relationship has improved quite a bit. And again, I campaigned on this 3 years ago. I've said it ever since, that what I and the Assembly agree on is far more than what we disagree on. We seem to be over here in this one corner disagreeing on mostly homeless stuff. And because it is contentious, we have maybe a different ethos on how we should be dealing with that. But on the other things, we agree on a lot. Because you watch, the work just gets done. I veto very little anymore. In fact, I can't remember my last veto. So we started off doing a lot of them because we were fighting so much. But I think that's that's calmed down a lot. I think, you're there at all the meetings, you see it, Emily, and we're encouraged by that, because the work's got to get done. The people expect the work to get done. It's that simple.
So, it's kind of a change in topic, but this question has come up a few times recently. Do you think that Anchorage's last few elections have been conducted in a free, fair, and transparent manner?
I have no proof whatsoever that they haven't been done freely and fairly. I look at the system, which is controlled by one person, unquestioned authority, and that gives pause. Do I think we should go back to day of voting the old way? Yeah, I do, because it's far less expensive and it's far quicker in getting the vote results out. But as far as cheating, I just don't see it. I'll be honest with you, and I know on the right there's some considerations, but we look at these things, and other people do, and quite frankly, the right doesn't show up to vote like they should, and that's on them. That's not on the system. But for appearance's sake, do I like the way it's done, where it's unquestioned authority? The clerk controls absolutely everything, and no, I don't like it, but I don't see any cheating.
Can I just follow up? I mean, you earlier had pushed for the clerk to become an elected position, and I'm curious if you.
Well, these two things fit together. If your readers and your watchers, viewers don't know, the clerk is paid by the assembly, and the clerk has that ultimate control. If we're going to have a system that's controlled by one person, something that's that important, the people should have a voice in that, who that person is. When you have that level of control, I think that position should be an elected position. So because we don't have the checks and balances there that I think the average person would assume we should have.
So during the last two assembly elections, this kind of goes back to what you were talking about previously. Most conservative candidates lost, candidates for assembly. Why do you think that is?
Well, again, if you look at the voter turnout on the right, I just think people just failed to show up. I mean, if you're going to play the game, you got to show up. And this is the most important game there is, I think. And so what motivates them to not show up when they traditionally did, I don't know. It might be lack of trust in the system itself. I don't know. One may feed the other. But you don't have a chance of making things better or advancing your cause if you don't participate. I'm a super voter. I always vote. I don't think I've ever missed a vote. Even when I was overseas, I always voted absentee. It's a responsibility.
Since you first moved here, do you think that the kind of political composition of Anchorage has changed?
Well, we look at the roughly 10,000 people that have left the state and gone to the valley. I would say if you look at what's happened in the valley, they've become, I think, more conservative. So I think one could assume from that then that a lot of the conservatives left the city to move to other places. I can't prove that. I don't know, but it just seems indicative.
And you filed to run for mayor again.
Right.
So why do you want to continue as mayor of Anchorage, and how are you feeling about your own re-election campaign?
Well, second one first, I think we stand a really good chance of winning. But the people will decide in the end, and whatever they decide, I'll certainly support. Yes, I did file to run again. I think I have a lot to offer the city. We've kind of got a lot of the kinks worked out, and that's normal with the new administration, and a lot of us were new to politics and government itself. And so I think we're getting on step, and I think we have a lot to offer. We, quite frankly, are a countervailing force against, I think, what I would consider a fairly woke left assembly, by and large. And I think it's important that you have balance in government, and I think we provide that balance. I think we have provided that balance.
What does woke mean to you?
Well, you can go to the dictionary and find out, but it means, I think at the fundamental level, it means you're awakened to systemic problems, whether it be racism or whatever, sexism, and that you act to fix it. You know, wokeism is an ethos that it has a long history. It goes back to, fundamentally, back to the 1850s. So it comes from the Frankfurt School, and it comes from critical theory, and then we wind up with critical race theory and critical economic theory, and wokeism, I think, is theoretically that the most latest version of that. So that's my understanding of it. I might be wrong, but that's my understanding of it.
So this is a question that's also come up recently,
Mhm.
Having to do with the election challenge brought by your former chief of staff.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that situation? The fact that your IT director emailed your former chief of staff a policy he posted to the Muni intranet, and then that same day she quoted that policy in.
Who is she in this regard?
Sammy Graham.
Oh, okay.
Sammy Graham, your former chief of staff.
Uh-huh.
Quoted that policy that had not been gone through the proper processes for
Right.
creating a Muni-wide policy. What do you think happened there, and what do you think about it? You know, it's caused a lot of concern and some controversy. There was a work session on Friday where your current chief of staff was there speaking about it. What do you think about it? We just haven't heard from you on this topic.
Well, I think I'll let the process work its way through on that one. I wasn't informed of what was going on, and I didn't know there was a work session on this on Friday, and that's fine. I was gone. Again, that's I guess an HR issue. I'll let that play itself out one way or another, because I don't have any information on it, so I'm not going to comment on it.
So, your administration has seen an unusually high number of executive and high-level staff members leave, high amount of turnover. Why do you think that is? And what are you doing now, if anything, differently to retain your current executive staff?
Well, we're a team. This team is more like a family. We certainly have had our squabbles, but if you look at it an unusual, we go back historically at this, in the administrative level here. I think Mark Begich went through 6 OMB directors, and multiple other directors. So I mean, in comparison, we're only going back, 4 administrations or so. Is it unusual? This is very normal. We looked at, I think, as we began year 2, we compared ourselves, because this issue the media keeps bringing it up, and we compared ourselves to the Berkowitz administration. We had one more departure after like 12 or 14 months, I think it was, than the Berkowitz administration. But for us, it's a crisis, and back then, I don't even know if it was reported on. You know, the narrative wasn't there that there was an unusual number of departures, but now there is. So I guess you'd have to maybe ask yourselves why it's reported differently when the data is roughly the same. In fact, pretty close to the same. So But it's always a work in process. My two comms guys they're leaving. They're in the room. They're moving on. They had committed to 2 years. Their 2 years is up, and they're moving to the school district. We'll bring on another comms team, or add to the comms team. We just hired our third person on our comms team from Channel 2, and are you asking them why there's a big turnover at Channel 2? Because there is. So I mean, this goes on, and this is a tough business to be in, and some people come and they commit for short periods of time. Some people commit indefinitely, and it's up. Every case is an individual that makes an individual decision. This isn't compulsory. This is not a compulsory place to work.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So you're saying that you looked back at previous administrations going back to Begich, and through Begich, Sullivan, and Berkowitz, you saw consistencies in the level of top executive turnover in the first 2 years?
We just kind of anecdotally look back and says, well, when was another? Well, we had some folks that were around during the Begich, and they says, well, he went through a whole bunch of OMB directors, and I think the number was 6. I don't recall, and there was another department that had a lot of fallout too. So it is what it is. I'm real happy with the team that we have right now. We've got a couple more positions or a couple additions that we're going to fill, and we're screening for them, and I'm actually very happy with who we have right now.
Okay. Given there was a high amount of snowfall last winter,
Mm-hmm.
and there were issues with snow removal,
Mhm.
what are you doing to prepare better for this coming winter?
Right. Well, there was 2 problems. There was a problem with snow plowing, and then there was problems with snow removal, and those are 2 separate functions. So we got, I guess you would call it, the perfect storm. We got 2 feet of snow roughly, especially in Muldoon. So we got 2 feet of snow, 2 days off, 2 feet of snow, 2 days off, 2 feet of snow. We would have been better off had we got 6 feet all at once. Because of how we are compelled to plow our streets, we plow it in a sequential manner, and it has to do with public safety. So we plow our arterials first, because that's how you get to the hospitals, and that's how the police, and then the connectors, which connect the arterials, and then we go into the residentials. And so on that cycle, you would plow, and then you'd be just ready to go into the residential areas, and the next snow would hit. And so you got to stop that and move those people and move it back to the arterials. And you start all over, and we did it. We went through 3 iterations of that, so the snow really piled up in the residential. My cul-de-sac was the same way. I mean, it got deep. But that's just the way we have to do it. We started off with, the plowing is primarily done with graders. We had 31 graders, and we got into it. We went down to 27 for maintenance issues. They came back up within just a few days, but a few days really matters. And then we got into snow removal after we got through the residentials. We got into snow removal, which is another challenge, especially downtown, because there's that much snow. But it was a historic snowfall. It's 40 or 50-year snowfall, and could we have done better? Certainly. It's my responsibility to plow snow and fix potholes and things like that, ultimately. I budget for that. We added about $1 million to that budget for the next year. And then in January, I directed a roundtable meeting, which we had, on how are we going to address this and get more flexibility. That report will be due out in a few weeks. And then we will communicate to the public what our snow, this is going to be a pretty significant change. We want to get back to where we were in 2011. We had a very robust snow plowing plan, and we kind of evolved away from that in the mid-teens. We want to get back to that, which allowed flexibility, because me as an employer of nearly 3,000 people, I wanted to be able to tell people that they can stay home. I don't want our workers, if you have your computer, you can work from anywhere. Why do they have to come to the office? Well, we have a computer system and it's called SAP. And there's a lot of workers that they don't get paid if they don't show up here or whatever building and punch a time card with their ID. And I don't want to penalize them, because if they can work from home, why aren't they getting paid? So the SAP system, so I've directed that we work around that. We've got a great new HR director, Tyler, and he came from Chugach Electric and the state, and very experienced. And he's working on a system where we can get the computer to allow those kinds of things. We had 2 employees that snowshoed to work. I think you guys may have even reported on one of those people, I think. And that's great. It sure demonstrates a desire to work and work hard, but we don't need that. In a 21st century with the technology that we have, we can stay at home. But then again, that very same technology prevents us from working at home, because I don't think an employee should be penalized, not paid, or have to take leave time for a blizzard when they're working at home. So it's complex. We also need a lot more flexibility, in the snow plowing. We want to coordinate much more with the school district. That's important. And there's always room for improvement. But this happened to Mayor Sullivan. He had this, and he budgeted a lot of money, and taxes go up. When you budget more for snow removal, taxes go up. The more you spend, the more we put on the property taxpayer. And then he had a couple of years of low snowfall, and then they said, why are you wasting all this money? So, but that's one of those many catch-22s in politics. So, and that's on me.
So, you touched on this briefly before, regarding homelessness. When you campaigned for mayor, you strongly criticized the assembly and previous mayors for their approach to homelessness. During one forum with other candidates during the campaign, you said, "We have a serious vagrancy and homeless problem. Crime is growing on our streets. Our local government seems absolutely out of control." After 2 years in office, what, if anything, has changed about your understanding of homelessness in Anchorage? And what has changed in terms of your policy and approach to solutions, if anything?
Well, for one thing, as we keep property taxes and spending under control, I think the government should be involved at the public safety level, and so that includes automatically, I believe, a shelter. We need to have a shelter, which I would hope would be privately owned or privately operated, but controlled or owned by the government. I think that, and that's what the proposal that we came in with. And to be blunt here, we are on the same path, or have been, I should say, on the same path as the cities that are failing. San Francisco probably being the preeminent city that's in failure. We see the retailers, the chain stores are leaving. They're some of the most expensive real estate in the country, and they're just abandoning it. And it's because of this issue. And I think it comes, and you look at the cities like, say, Reno, Nevada, who are very successful, and what do they have? They have an intensively managed large shelter. And I think we need to get to that. I've always thought that. And you know the history of it. Emily, you've been sitting there for all the meetings. It went back and forth. It got approved. But to the degree that municipal government should be involved in homelessness, that was the degree that it should have. And that proposal was shot down because we're stuck into an ethos of housing first. I spend nearly every day at 3rd and Ingram now. It used to be the campground last summer, and in Cuddy Park and places like that. A lot of the unsheltered right now, we're helping, short histories, we help about 3,000 people in the city, and some just need a little bit of rental assistance. They have jobs, they have insurance on their cars, but they need rental assistance so they don't drop into the street. But there's others, the last remaining unsheltered are about 775. That's plus or minus a few every day. That's the count. And those people, it's heavily drug dependent, heavily alcohol dependent, a great deal, and we get these numbers from South Central Foundation, a lot of it is psychiatric. They're not going into an apartment. You can build them the best house in the world, they're not going in. There's a lot of problems there. So it's not housing first. It's got to be shelter first, especially in the winter. And then you got to be navigated, which means you begin that touch with what we call wraparound services. So you need you need the professional psychiatric care to first analyze where is that person at that moment in time. Are they high at that moment? Well, they need to be detoxed and not freeze to death. And so this has been the focus of the contest between me and the Assembly. I look at the cities. I just had a long conversation with San Diego's county. It turns out he's a former Delta pilot as well. Jim Desmond, San Diego County supervisor. They're facing the same challenges we are, and he has said San Francisco is lost. He says, and he says Los Angeles is about to do that, and he says my job is make sure San Diego doesn't. And I says, well, I'm hoping he's leading because there's going to be legal challenges to everything you do. We saw that with the Cuddy Park. We were challenged legally on that. So I hope, being in the Ninth Circuit, we have an extra level of restriction on us. And with the Martin versus Boise decision, and we need a pathway around that or through that to operate, because our citizens, our tax-paying citizens, are paying the price for not creating a large shelter. It's a numbers game in the end of the day. If I get enough shelter, if I can get 776 shelter beds, then I can enforce our vagrancy laws, and I can say you can't be on public land anymore. And until we get to that threshold, it's a magic point. I can't do anything. We have laws that we are not allowed, by Ninth Circuit court decision, we're not allowed to enforce. That's the problem. That's what the public sees. And we can do some mitigation. We've got a great team at Parks and Recs that helps, great team at Health Department that helps. But at the end of the day, to get the taxpayers to what we want to do, what's best for the whole city, to include the unsheltered people, we've got to build a large shelter, because the law compels us to do that, and the Assembly has decided not to do that.
Well, I know this is a sort of a policy where there's just different sides coming at it, but I mean, how do you answer when some of the homeless service providers say, look, we don't think large-scale shelter is the right thing to do, it mixes different populations in one place, it becomes unmanageable after a certain threshold. I mean, if there were a tent with 776 beds, it seems like the shelter providers or the service providers around town would be.
Well, why does it work at 950 in Reno? Why does it work in downtown Los Angeles at 1,000? It does work, but it's all in the management. You have to intensively manage this people. And I would ask the question, is a large shelter that's intensively managed, like Reno or some of the other cities that do this, is that worse than what we have right now? And I'm just telling you, I'm at Third and Ingra a lot. There's Davis Park, which some would argue is even worse. I'm telling you, make a decision on what's worse. I've made the decision. I say a large shelter is far less worse than what we have right now. But the Assembly controls the purse strings. I don't. We want it that way, by the way. But I have to work within the rules, within the system that I'm given, and that's the legislative body writes the checks. They approved the large facility on Tudor Elmore, and then they disapproved it, and now we're studying things again. We're doing this clean slate studying thing. It's at the shelter level. I support most of the hotel conversions, and I support what the public-private partnerships are doing, like Providence and the other groups. Great work. I'm at their dedications. I've helped financially support them. But the shelter portion, that entry point for the most problematic population, we don't have that. And so the official count is, in the last 3 years, we've spent $161 million in Anchorage on homelessness. That's what was spent through our computer system, SAP. We don't even have a shelter to show for it. Where did all that money go? Now, we did some good things. We helped some of the P3s to stand up. That's good stuff, don't get me wrong. But why don't we have a shelter?
And that 100
Because you can't even begin to approach this problem, solve this problem, without a shelter. Can't do it.
I'm getting the one question last.
One question,
From,
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
It's last. It has nothing to do with this, but it's just on
Yeah.
housing. I mean, what do you think the city needs to do to bring more housing online so that young people?
Anything and everything. We need reasonable, rational revisions of Title 21. That's the section that tells us how we can use our property. The codes. We need to make these. We need to get it where private enterprise can make money at building the homes that we need. We don't need to compel government-style housing, Section 8 housing necessarily. The marketplace will solve most of this problem. We look at Block 41 down the street here. It's a privately funded enterprise, roughly $300 million, and they're going to have living space and retail space and a hotel. All this stuff adds to it. We can't just be building cheap little homes to house the homeless. The marketplace, if we build more $800 or $1 million homes, $800,000 or $1 million homes, that brings along everybody, because people move up and they vacate and they vacate. And so all of a sudden now the $200,000, $250,000, $300,000 home or condo becomes available. That's economics. And if we get away from that, we start dictating to the marketplace how to build homes and what homes to build. I'm telling you, we're starting down a path that just doesn't end well. So we got to get government out of the way of the profitable building of all housing, all of it. So
Where do you think funding should come from for a shelter or shelters, low-barrier shelters in Anchorage, just in general, whether it's Tudor and Elmore or another location? I know that's been a real problem for
Right.
your administration and the assembly, just trying to figure out how are we going to pay for this? We
Well,
need it,
let me again
clearly.
start from the general and I'll work to the specific. And it's this: we have 40% of the population of the state, and we have 65% of the homeless state populations in the state. Our taxpayers here can't keep footing that entire bill. This is a statewide problem. It is. We know Fairbanks sends people here. We know the Valley does. We know the Kenai Peninsula does, to include a lot of the villages. They send their homeless and some of their problematic people here. If that's the way it's going to be, this needs a statewide solution, especially in the funding space. And we need a much larger API, much larger. It needs to be completely staffed, completely funded, professionally managed. But we need a large shelter. And we went to the legislature last session for $25 million to build and operate a shelter plus some other things. And we're going to go to them again, because morally, this is what's coming, winter. We all know that. I am not going to be responsible for people freezing to death on this street. I'm doing everything I can, literally. I'm doing everything I can to keep that from happening. We set a record this last year on how many people died unsheltered in the city. We're going to beat that. If something doesn't happen, we're going to beat that record this next winter. And so with that moral impetus for me, we're going to start giving airline tickets for people to go where they want to go. If they want to go to a warmer climate, it's far cheaper to give them $600 to get an airline ticket to anywhere from San Diego all the way to Seattle, or to Fairbanks, or where they've got family that can take them, or back to the bush. I have no choice now, because we don't have a large shelter to put these people when they need it at 10 below. We're going to give airline tickets to send people back to where they want to go. And didn't want to do that, never wanted to be there, but guess what? That's what's coming.
So Sullivan Arena is off the table?
Sullivan Arena, my understanding is, won't be used for a homeless shelter again.